Okay, now we get to the fun part. We're going to go update revenue and expenditures, where we are. Remember last week we talked about business office, the superintendent's office. So now we're going to go this week into where we are with the instructional piece of our budget. And everything that Ann Jackson has spoken about, Dr. Bailey, all of what they've talked about is incorporated into the numbers you see. If we go to general education, again, the salaries are what they are. Equipment is just a small increase. I can tell you it does include some of what our curriculum content specialist asked for. There's some, I have to give props to them. They know what they want, whether it's the music, phys ed. They have a plan. They do their budgets very well. This equipment allows Ms. McLaughlin to purchase a saxophone that they have been waiting for. They look at their whole program before they make those requests, and that will allow for that. Field trips, again, as Dr. Bailey said, we did across the board $5,000 for each school. Again, it represents about an 80% increase. Safety and security, the board made it very clear that's what one of the areas they found was important, as do we. So there's an allowance of $50,000. Again, contractual is just certain things in the budget, whether it be music repair, equipment repair, things like that, things that we contractually obligated to buy. Textbooks are what they are. And material and supplies, that's across the board. That does include paper. That's a $50,000 item. I know we talked about that earlier today. It would be one of those days that we can hopefully reduce as we move to an electronic environment. The contractual, again, as I look at my notes, includes graduation, includes postage, all of those things. Okay, we did increase postage a little bit because we've sent more notices home that required to go out through the mail. If we look at general education continued, I pulled out some of those things that are a little different or a little higher price. One of them is the STARS program that we do. We increased that a slight amount this year, $500, to help them as they try to offset their costs for liability insurance. Tuition in public schools is $20,000. That would be for any of our students that attend another school. For whatever reason, it's relatively low expense. However, charter schools, we did reduce. However, we still are allowing for 7 students to attend a charter school. We're on the hook for that, regardless of when they start. The only, if we had a student move in today that wanted to start into a charter school, if we didn't have a bus going there now, we wouldn't have to implement the transportation this year, but we would have to next year. But we're always on the hook for the tuition. And our BOCES program is all of the special education expenses that come through BOCES, CTE, Tech Valley, they're all lumped together there. That general ed for that BOCES line. We get into the student support services. Again, that's what Ms. Jackson spoke to today. It encompasses all areas. First, I'm going to talk about special education. That's salaries, that's everyone, that's teacher assistants, instructional, non-instructional. Contractual services, you'll see an increase there of $30,000 is where we earmarked the money for the mental health clinic. Out-of-district private placements, there's the dollars involved with that. Again, we put a little bit of a level of cushion there. I hate to say that word because we never want to be short if we have a student that comes into our district that was from an out-of-district placement. We would continue that for the year. We had some of that since I've been here. And the out-of-district public is the BOCES expense. We left that where it is. Again, we have to allow for the things that we don't know going into a school year. Again, the other contractual expenses are minimal, and material and supplies is a minimal increase as well. When I talk about the out-of-district private, we're talking about Wildwood, the private placements, Parsons, things that Ann talked to earlier, and Cindy. Again, under that umbrella of student support services, we have guidance and health services. That's our guidance counselors. Again, their proposed salary versus their current salary. We know we happily settled the contract so we can be accurate in those figures. The nurses' salaries are the same. Again, the contractual increase is minor increase. And material and supplies, again, no increase across the board there. And student support services also include psychologists and social workers. And again, simply put, their salaries, the increase, and the material and supplies. I think the most important piece for today, I feel like I'm rushing, but I'll slow down when we talk about revenue, because that's the critical piece as we talk today. Transportation, again, their salaries, that's what all of them are, whether they're a monitor, anything in transportation is right there. Equipment, they do need some pieces of equipment in the garage. We budgeted it there. Tools, minor tools. Fuel, we dropped $47,500. Parts, tires, motor oil, we can leave that the way it is. And then if the prices of fuel go up, we'll have a little bit of a cushion there. And the bus garage expense itself is $58,000, and we're leaving contract transportation the way it is. Now, we have been talking with Greenville Central School District. We'll be bidding with them this year, which will hopefully save us some money. As we know, we always talk about regionalized transportation. That's still on the table. We're still evaluating that. I'd like to tell you that we can reduce that expense next year. We may have to make a decision as a governing body to centralize pickup for those out-of-district private placements. We're going to evaluate that. Jen's already meeting with Greenville to try to organize some of that. Oh, we did talk about it last week, yeah, or was it last week we talked about that? Then that will be something that we will do, because it will help us drop costs. It'll be I'm going to say a marketing issue for us to notify those parents and be prepared for some of that. But again, it helps us to reduce costs. That's what we will do. Employee benefits, retire the employee retirement system, which is for all of those in the ERS system or the non-instructional, anybody that's not a teacher. It's an optional system. We dropped that. The teacher's retirement system, we reduced by $50,000. A lot of these changes were made because we now have an approved contract. We can finalize those numbers a little bit more. FICA Medicare, we reduced $50,000. Unemployment, we're leaving the same. Hospital and medical has a 5% increase. And the administrative fees in employee benefits went down $150. If you remember correctly, last year, at the very last minute, the state came through with a little more money for us. We put $150,000 in the employee benefit line, so we didn't have to take money out this year from the employee reserve for our retirees. Okay, that's why that's going down. We're not going to budget that. We'll go back to the reserve. This is the part that I want to talk a little bit more in depth to, and it's our fund balance. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in at all. Please ask any questions. But again, we've already gone through fund balance a little bit. As we look at where we are right now, on the left, I'll walk over here and show you, under the 63017 column, these are what we know our reserves to be right now. We've appropriated $750,000 towards our budget revenue side. We knew we have an allowable 4% of $1.8 million. We talked about the fact that we were over our allowable fund, our 4% fund balance. But our total fund balance, made up of everything there, is $9.6 million. We're going to start there at the end of this year. We're going to add in all of our revenues, which is this figure right here, which is $45.8 million. I'm pretending that we're going to spend every dime we budgeted, and we're going to get every penny that we did in revenue. And then that means we would still start with a fund balance of 9.6. Chances are our expenditures will be a little lower than our revenue, so that might go up a little bit. If it's the reverse, that starting fund balance could be down a little bit. But from that, we know I'm going to recommend that we appropriate $136,000 of our reserve for debt, the red line. We have a schedule that we have to keep for any reserve for debt that we have. We have to expire about $20,000 of that this current year. It's expired. It leaves us $136,000 that's going to expire next year that we're going to apply to the revenue of this year's budget we're proposing right now. Employee benefit reserve, I'm assuming we may have to take $100,000 out of that. Some of these are assumptions
Tax certiorari reserve is still going to be $500,000. That's good for 4 years before we have to start bringing that into the general fund, given if we don't have any other new tax cert concerns or challenges that we've faced recently. Leaving the unemployment reserve the way it is. Our capital reserve right now is still at $782,000. The reserve for encumbrance is nothing that we have to worry about because it's for things that are left over from the prior year. That money goes with it, but I just throw it in there because it's part of the financial statement. I'm also recommending in red here that we appropriate $1,050,000 to offset our expenditure side. That's a strategic move, one that the board needs to be well aware of and approve, because our goal will be to bring that back down to around the 750 range over the next couple of years, and I have a plan for that. So that would leave us with an allowable 4% fund balance. That's $1.9 million. That's 4% of the budget we're recommending for next year. Still, leaving us 4% over our 4%, we still have $1.7 million. I'm going to stay right up here because I'm going to give you a couple scenarios on where we could be if we want to close that gap. If you remember the last time, our gap between revenue and expenditures was about $400,000. I said I had a plan for that. I do. I'm asking you guys to approve it or to entertain it. But back over here on the left side, I'm going to start where we were. Pretending we have every single penny of revenue. We're going to spend every penny we had. We're going to leave our fund balance at 9.6, which is right up here. Again, I'm also putting up there a new reserve called an ERS reserve that can be established by a board resolution. It helps to offset our costs. A reserve for debt would still be 136 because we're planning on using that for our revenue this year. Employee benefit reserve, the tax cert, unemployment, the capital reserve is all things right now. Again, and on the far right column, I would recommend that we fund the employee ERS reserve with $300,000. I would gladly fund a TRS reserve as well. Right now, the legislation prevents us from doing that. It's the oddest thing. There is legislation on the table right now to create an allowance for a TRS reserve. It makes no sense. But again, that can help us mitigate expenditure increases in future years. The reserve for debt, again, we're going to spend that money. The employee benefit reserve, I would recommend that we put some money in that as well, depending on what we spend this year, what we have for retirees, how much the payout is. We can't just put all the money in there because the lawyers will come in and want to see what our liability is. They don't let us overfund it. Tax cert, we talked about, we're going to leave that alone. The unemployment reserve, we're going to not touch that. The capital reserve. In 2014, this Board of Education established a capital reserve. It has a 10-year life, and it can be funded up to $5 million, I think. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. But again, that would be an area that we might want to put some of our money. I've increased it to $1 million. Again, these would be all things that would take action from the board. Nothing that I'm doing without action. We'd bring it through as a resolution. The challenges in a capital reserve are that they require voter approval to spend that money. But what it does, it allows us to prepare ourselves for future building projects. It gives us money to start. So it buys us money because of the aid factor. Again, I'm leaving the reserve for encumbrance. I never know what they are from year to year. It's after whatever POs we have left. Appropriated fund balance, again, is $1,050,000. That would leave us with a 4% allowable of 1.9, and again, the unassigned, still above 4, is still $1 million. Again, that would still be about 2.4% above what we're allowed to carry over. So I'm comfortable closing that gap that we had with using some of our fund balance. But the plan is going to be, over the long run, to reduce our expenditures, as we do that, to bring that back down. Because in the event that we have a catastrophe or the state takes away money from us, we wouldn't want to have to come up with all of that money to close a budget. But as you can see, our fund balance is healthy. And now we want to talk about our gap.
You just heard at the end of this?
Well, we talk about it a lot. One of the things we're going to do in the next few months, probably in May, is come up with a fund balance projection. It's going to be a plan for our fund balance that we're going to approve as a Board of Education. We're going to go through these things quarterly, whatever it takes, so we stay on top of what our fund balance is. So right now, everything that you've heard about tonight, all the reductions, all the increases, leaves us with a spending program of $47,699,010. Our current revenue, assuming we increase $436,000 in fund balance, would be $47,638,365. Again, that expiring debt, that comes off, we have to bring it over to the general fund anyway. Allowing $300,000 in an ERS reserve will allow us to bring that over as we go in from year to year. And it also allows $300,000 from our fund balance, but our current budget shortfall right now today is $60,645. We're going to be meeting on the 17th. We're going to go through all of these expenditures as a recap. I'm hoping a couple of things. We can reduce our budget, our expenditures, $60,000 if we need to close that gap today. I'm sure we can reduce material and supplies, some equipment lines, $60,000. We're also going to wait for the state. There's some talk that the state is going to approve a budget by Easter. None of us know. But if they do, and we do get more money, I would recommend that we close that gap and place any excess and reduce our appropriated fund balance so we don't have to spend all that money. Then we'll be having a conversation about where we want that money to go. Do we want it to go to a capital reserve? Do we want to fund an ERS reserve? But that'll become part of the plan as we build this budget. Does anybody, I would hope, have any questions?
Yep.
Okay.
If we're going to move $436,000 over, why not just move the other $60,645?
We can do that. We absolutely could, but I was just, we could do it that way too.
Because we're not supposed to have that 2% over the 4%. So
Yep. We can do that.
Right.
I just thought we would just wait to see if the state settled the budget, but we can absolutely do it that way and not reduce expenditures.
What else would we do with the extra 2.42% that we're not supposed to have above the 4%?
It's not a matter of not supposed to have it. We can put it in reserves. We can't overfund reserves, but we can put it in reserves. We can leave it there and take a hit. I would like to reduce it. In the current year we sit in, it's almost 4%, and we made a decision to let that sit there. And now as we go through this year, we know where we stand, that it would be my recommendation that we, I lost my train of thought there for a second, sorry, Bray, but that we leave it this way. We can, extra fund balance, sorry. We can leave it. We can take a hit from the auditor. We can't overfund reserves. I would never recommend that because that's not good. And we can't overtax our taxpayer. So we would do stuff with that reserve and be ready to use some of it. That's part of establishing an ERS reserve because you can bring some money in for that to offset that expenditure year to year.
With that extra money, I know we could put it into the capital reserve. Is there a way we could use some of that money on our current construction project? I know we still have phases, but we're still capped on our current
No, we can't use any of that money to go towards the current project without a voter approval. But we did a referendum with that. We allowed a certain amount, and we have spent that.
All right, so it would have to be for a future project.
And I think that's smart, and part of what we can do is talk about when the next debt comes off, we can talk about how we can utilize that money to fund our next capital project.
Yeah.
And we have a 10-year, that does not expire, that capital reserve that this board established until 2024, I think it was established in 14, the year before I started.
I'm sorry, after you.
Is some of that money earmarked in the event that we get approval for the Smart Bonds Act to kind of, because we have to buy up front and then get reimbursed, right?
Yeah, we have to be careful with that. We have to talk about that as a group, because what we don't ever want to do, we can't earmark money aside and spend it. We can't spend some of our current appropriations in the event that we didn't get that money timely, so we really have to make some well thought out decisions if we can help fund some of that infrastructure for technology.
Is there any penalty that could be levied against us for having that overage?
There's not necessarily a penalty if we haven't overtaxed our taxpayer. The Office of the State Comptroller always comes in, they'll look at our fund balance, they'll look at everything, but if we have a plan for fund balance,
that we have implemented and we stick to, then we'll be fine. We have never, except, well, Tiffany, I should say, has been here the longest out of all of us in the business office. We've never had a year outside of this year where we haven't put away all of our excess fund balance. We've spent a lot of time putting money in the employee reserve so we can fund retirements as they come up, and we can continue to put money in there, but we can't overfund it.
I think we just need to be prudent. I mean, this, as you said, we don't normally do this. We need to manage during the good times to prepare for the not so good times. You know, obviously one correction on Wall Street and all of a sudden, you know, TRS and things like that are, you know, going back up. Healthcare could easily go back up. So I just want to make sure that we're being prudent so that we don't have to go through what we went through in my first 5 years on the board, where it was just painstakingly difficult decision after difficult decision.
And some of the things, as we have different, you know, if we recognize and we can reduce expenditures, we can leave the reserves for the ERS, and hopefully they'll allow us to create a TRS reserve. And those will help us to prepare for things like the stock market changes. So in future years, if that were to happen, we would have money in reserves to help us offset some of that. But we have enough fund balance to do it. We just can't continue to increase it because we want to not ever have the burden in a following year have that fund balance have to be made up totally by the taxpayer. And right now, we're not in that scenario.
Right. And one thing, obviously, and you can speak to this, remember about fund balance is once it's gone, it's gone. So you can't necessarily always throw it the way we're doing that. That's why you keep talking about bringing it back down to a more sustainable number.
Correct. And what we'll do as we go through this year and we know where our expenditures are going to be, where our handle is, where our revenues, we're going to have the same discussion with actual figures so you can see what we have. So as we go through May and June and we make recommendations to put money in a reserve, we'll know what we're up against. As far as if our revenue is going to exceed our expenditures this year, that'll be a plus to our fund balance. If our expenditures are going to be more than our revenue, that'll decrease our fund balance. But we try very hard to be conservative so there's not any huge sways. We've been out with our negotiations, having new people in my seat have created some of that excess, you know, not knowing historically what I was up against, but now we could have a plan to bring it back down.
Any other questions, guys?
So New York State gives a rating to all schools in New York State about their financial health. And we are a district in good financial health with some good stewardship. And just as you said, Jim, it doesn't take a lot of surprising events to unsettle that pretty significantly. And when you do have to dip into reserves, that money is gone. It doesn't replenish itself. It's a lot of tireless work or tiring work to redevelop it over a span of time. So we're very pleased with the position that we're in right now. That's a very narrow margin to have to close, and to be able to continue to maintain and to think creatively about the program that we have. The other thing that we will be doing sometime in the next 6 months is we do want to have an external entity come in and assist us in looking through our financial processes. We're being careful not to place it out of order, though, because we were just discussing in the Building and Grounds meeting, we need a strategic plan for what we want to do programmatically in our district. We need a strategic plan for what we want to do with our facilities, and then we need to make sure our finances are in line with what we dream of. So we're going to call that person in when we get to a point where we say, this is what we want, this is how long it's going to have to last us, and how are we going to get there.
If I was wearing my taxpayer hat, you know, I would say, obviously, we've given you this money, we want you to use it, and if this is not an anomaly and continues to be a trend, then we need to rethink how we're, you know, maybe the level of conservativeness. Like you said, some sustainability and same person in role for a number of years would be helpful with that, but just need to keep that in the back of our mind that this is money they've given us to spend, and we need to do our best to use that money. All right.